we are in the condition we are in the state of ignorance we are in the state of war, in the state of economic depression, in the state of depletion of the resources of our planet because of the greed of psychopaths who thought they could create their own reality. Well, look at the reality they created.
You're listening to SOTT Talk Radio, the world for people who think.
Hello and welcome to SOTT Talk Radio. My name is Neil Bradley. Your co-host tonight is Joe Quinn. And we've also got with us Pierre Lescaudron. Hello. And Lorna Jajic. It's coming up on 50 years, hard to believe, half a century since the assassination of JFK. That day marked the day, it marked the day that America died. It was a tragic for most Americans, of course, but also for ordinary people the world over. People who choose peace over war, equality over injustice, and happiness over greed. The assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy was pivotal in setting the United States on its current path towards doom. So this week on SOTT Talk Radio, we're going to reflect on the life of a man who dreamed of a better world and was making that dream a reality until assassins' bullets killed the American dream that sunny November day in Dallas, Texas. Where were you that day, Laura?
Well, I was 11 years old. I was in my 6th grade classroom. The rest of the class had gone out to recess. I had to stay inside because I'd been sick, and so I was allowed to sit in the classroom alone and watch television. And I was watching television, and the news report came on, and it was very shocking. And I ran outside to my teacher on the playground, and I said to him, "You'll never believe what just came on the news." He said, "The president's been shot. The president's been shot." And he thought I was joking. And I said, "I'm not joking. It's real. It was on the news. I'm watching TV. It's on the news." And he came running inside, and the class came running inside, and everybody in the whole school, came running inside their classrooms from recess. And it was just terrible. It was just really, really terrible. We just sat there in stunned silence the whole rest of the day until we went home on the school bus watching the news and learning that the president had died. It was devastating. It was, personally, everybody was crying. Everybody was crying.
Yeah, that's what is interesting when you ask people who were alive at the time, where were you when you learned about JFK's death? It's been 50 years ago now, but they all still remember very well this moment.
I don't think anybody could forget it. I'm 61 years old now, and I still grieve for what happened that day. It still evokes in me a very strong emotional reaction, and the more I have learned about John Kennedy, even in the face of the defamers and slanderers and libelers and filthy-minded people who have tried to blacken his memory and make him look like he was a psychopath or whatever, the more I've learned about him from actually researching the topic, the more grievous I realized that day actually was. It was literally the day when John Kennedy was assassinated, and the American people did not rise up en masse and demand an accounting, of true accounting. That was the day that the American conscience was killed. That was the day that America died.
It reminds me of Walter Cronkite mentioning to one of his colleagues that the children at school were crying so much that they had to cancel class and send the children back to their house. And it makes me wonder, how come children who don't know this much about politics, about all what is going on, reacted with such intensity? And maybe on a subtle level, unconscious level, a lot of human beings knew what was going on, knew that it was literally the beginning of the end for them and for the others.
Yeah, in the historical narrative that's grown up around that time, not just the event itself, but JFK's legacy and what his administration achieved and didn't achieve, it's always, nearly always, filtered through this sort of texture of, oh, well, it was a very polarizing presidency. He wasn't popular in all quarters, and not everybody understood him or liked him, and so on and so forth. But it's clear that the vast majority of ordinary people understood him, even if they didn't understand sometimes what he was saying, because it would have been pretty highbrow to a lot of people. I think, Pierre, you're onto something when you say instinctively, they knew he was a good man.
And you cannot please everybody. In a world that presents such a duality, with a small elite oppressing the majority of the people, either you please the elite or you please the people. And JFK was one of very, very few leaders who genuinely was trying and did actually serve the people. And therefore, he had to threaten the privileges of the elites.
Yeah, and it's very reminiscent of the assassination of Julius Caesar, and how the assassin Brutus claimed he was doing it for freedom, and what it was the freedom of the oligarchy to continue to oppress the masses and steal their stuff and own everything and let everybody else starve. The 1% versus the 99%, or possibly even, I don't even think in Rome that it was 1%. It was a percentage of 1%. And I think that what has happened in the U.S. since the assassination of John Kennedy has been very similar to what happened in Rome, though in a slightly different, more technological fashion after what happened to Caesar. We are really approaching an imperium if something else doesn't happen. We don't know what's going to happen.
And the similarities between those two statesmen are striking. And actually, the magazine Fortune titled in April, right after the steel crisis, U.S. Steel Company was raising the prices. Kennedy fought against these illegal practices and won. But then he became a clear enemy of the industries, of the businessmen. And Fortune titled Kennedy the Ides of April.
The Ides of April.
Ides of April.
Very interesting. Yeah. So there was a similar defamation campaign that was instituted against Kennedy following his death that was very reminiscent of the one that was instituted against Julius Caesar, including, very slanderous claims about sexual proclivities and, horsing around and getting it on with every woman, doing the Don Juan number 7 days a week or whatever. And whether or not John Kennedy actually, had affairs, I can't really say. It seems that it's possible that he did. There's certainly people who've come forward and said he did. But just recently, his medical records were released from, these among the records that had been sequestered for the last 50 years. And I just read the article about it recently. And apparently, according to his medical records, he was in constant pain for years and years and years. And he was receiving treatments, injections. He had, drugs to help him keep going, drugs to help him sleep, drugs to help him control the pain. And we're talking about, major pain. And I can tell you right now, based on his medical records and having been in that, well, maybe not even that kind of pain, but having suffered from rheumatoid arthritis since I was 9 years old, I know that when you're in pain and you're on the medications that keep you going so that you can function in spite of pain, getting romantic is kind of like the last thing you feel like doing, either inclinationally or nor do you have the real ability to do it.
No, functionally, no.
Functionally, yeah. So, I mean, there's a huge problem with his medical records vis-a-vis his the claims about his romantic escapades. I mean, this man couldn't have been doing that stuff, for crying all night.
Yeah, he suffered from colitis, prostatitis, and a disorder called Addison's disease, which affects the blood's ability to regulate blood, sugar, and sodium. He also had osteoporosis of the lower back, causing pain so severe that he was unable to perform simple tasks such as reaching across his desk to pull papers forward or pulling the shoe and sock onto his left foot. That's according to historian Robert Dallek, who had access to his medical records.
And what he did is all the more impressive when you know the amount of suffering he had to cope with. But just to go back to this womanizing accusation, even if JFK had mistresses, even if Caesar had mistresses, the people who point the finger daily are the very ones who delight into those now extensively documented pedophile rings, including torture or other sacrificial rituals. So the asymmetry.
The man who accused JFK, this all began with Hoover. This was a guy who had sex parties with men only invited, so you can deduct from that what exactly he was getting involved in at a time when it was, I think, illegal. If not, it would have cost him his job anyway.
Well, he was hunting down homosexuals in his day job and partying with them, at night.
He was using rumors of homosexuality against others to blackmail them.
Yeah. So
he teamed up with Johnson, the vice president, to get both Kennedy brothers blackmailed. The way they did it was they would maybe send a message through someone else saying, it's okay, we know about so-and-so. For example, there was one time when Hoover personally went to the White House with photos of JFK leaving a house as a senator just before he got elected, leaving the house of someone else, of a young woman. And Hoover would say to him, like, it's okay, we're on top of things, it's safe with us. And he did this over and over and over again, especially in this case on the two Kennedys. This is the source of the womanizing claims, and this is probably how they boxed the Kennedys into having to accept Lyndon Johnson as the vice president.
Right, and making a claim like that or a threat like that, we've got a photograph of you leaving someone else's house, and John Kennedy knew that even if nothing had happened, and I'm not saying it did or it didn't, I don't know, but considering his condition, the likelihood of there being much in the way of hanky-panky was, whatever it was extremely mild. With Addison's disease and the circulatory problems, it's just not too likely that there was a lot going on if there was anything. But he knew, he was realistic enough to know that this could be blown up and made into a very big thing. So it could be used. Just the fact that he was leaving, a certain person's house could be used.
And I think, Neil, you mentioned an important point, compromises. And sometimes we have an idealistic vision of the president's role of JFK, but we have to keep in mind that he was really between the rock and a hard place. He had to fight every minute against the establishment, against the CIA, the FBI, the generals, the businessmen, to make his way. So he had to make some compromise. He had to throw a bone to the dog. He did agree with some covert sabotage operation in Cuba. He did agree to some extent with a coup d'etat against Diem in Vietnam, but all the time, every decision had to take into account those pressures.
He didn't really, in Vietnam, he didn't do it. That wasn't him who was involved in...
What was the story on that?
Well, it was the people behind him. It was his generals. I can't remember the name of the guys in particular, but he was betrayed, basically. He wanted to promote...
I read that he was shocked when he heard that Diem had been assassinated.
He wanted Diem to be the leader of the country, and Diem was overthrown by the CIA, essentially.
Yeah.
Against his wishes, against JFK's wishes.
Well, like, for example, if you read James Douglas's book, JFK and the Unspeakable, if your heart doesn't break when you read the passage about the exchanges between John Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev and how they defused the Cuban Missile Crisis between them by communicating directly with each other rather than allowing their spy masters and their generals to handle things, and how, basically they averted, between the two of them, they averted a nuclear war at a time when, it could have been absolutely mutually assured destruction, mad. So just reading that tells you that, at some point, even if John Kennedy got into office with the help of the mob, as is fairly well known because his father used a lot of money, spread a lot of money around among the mob, and that helped get him elected. And that, even saying that, tells us something about elections in the U.S. as far back as then, that they were completely manipulated events. So if anybody thinks that the American people actually elect their president, just please think again. But in any event, his father did help him get into the presidency, and I think John Kennedy, once he got there, he thought about things. He may have had a briefing. He may have realized what the situation was. He may have gotten himself into power because he wanted to fix things. He may have had a change of heart of some sort. James Douglas seems to think that he had a change of heart, that he saw things, that he realized things, that he had a conscience, and his conscience began to bother him. And he also looked at his children, who he knew would inherit whatever he did, and this affected him profoundly. So, we don't know exactly all of the details. We may never know the details, but there are certainly enough biographies written, each one providing a different perspective and different details, that we can sort of piece the picture together and come to the conclusion that there is no way in hell John Kennedy was a psychopath. As who was it that said that? It was the same guy who thinks psychopaths are the new man, right?
Yeah, I think it was somebody building on this study. There was a guy, Kevin Dutton, came out with a book about some of the great qualities of psychopaths we should aspire to, like leadership and decisiveness.
Like leadership and decisiveness cannot belong to a non-psychopath. I mean, that's jaw-dropping. That
was the implication. Somebody took that and ran with it and did a kind of a diagnostic of the last 50 presidents, and JFK came out number one.
Number one, eh?
The best, i.e. the most psychopathic president the United States has had.
Yeah, and of course they were basing their assessment on, his leadership and dynamic, decision-making qualities, and a whole, boatload of slurs and smears and BS information provided by that slimeball J. Edgar Hoover.
Exactly. If there was, we're not sure about this, but if there was a psychopath in that administration, Lyndon Baines Johnson, this guy was. That man was evil, pure evil. And he was complicit. The way he wormed his way into the administration to begin with, the pressure he put them under constantly, and some of the things that Robert Kennedy said immediately after, directly too, he confronted Lyndon the day after at the White House, and the conversation was overheard by a photographer, and he captured the moment where Lyndon puts on a pitiful face, like, what are you saying? And Robert apparently had punched a pillar in order to avoid punching Lyndon in the face, and he cried out to him, "Why did you have my brother killed?" So Robert knew right away.
Yeah,
I suspect.
Yeah, and there's an article recently where his son says that his father believed that the CIA was also very, very much involved in the assassination of his father, Bobby Kennedy, and obviously John Kennedy. So, but LBJ had to be complicit because the first thing he did when he got into office was reverse all of the, peace-oriented maneuvers that JFK had made and, began turning the wheels of the cover-up.
And, but there's a lot of people who, over the years, there's been a lot of people who have written books and published articles, and they've even had, what do you call that talk show host?
Geraldo
had back in the 90s, I think, had 3, Jim Mars and 2 other guys who had written books on it, and one of them had written a book that was basically saying that Johnson did it, and So that makes me a bit suspicious when the focus is only on,
Johnson.
LBJ did it, because obviously the idea that U.S. presidents are just kind of essentially ceremonial, titular kind of heads holds true and has held true for a long time, and the real power structures are behind them. So to focus it all on the president, for me, doesn't tell the whole story and doesn't reveal the whole truth about the nature of the power structure within the U.S. and who really pushes the buttons or pulls the strings. And you're talking about, there's the big Texan oil men, and the FBI and Hoover and the CIA are all over this behind the scenes type of thing. So certainly Johnson couldn't have done it on his own.
Oh, of course not.
Or couldn't. I would say that he wasn't even the main player. He was certainly. He went along with it. He was complicit in it. He was happy for it to happen because he got to be president, obviously. But.
And he made promises that if you do it, this is what I'll do for you.
Well, yeah, and he realized he had to hold to those promises, which points directly to where the real power source is.
Well, you immediately from the next to Johnson, you have Johnson's attorney, who was attorney for his whole career as a senator in Texas before he went into the government. There is sworn testimony that one guy, I think it was Clint Murchison, who basically ran Texas, that was the quote from them, said he expected from Johnson $8 million spread over his 2 terms as president.
That was Edward Clark.
Edward Clark,
yeah.
That's right. He was a big Texas millionaire. He was Johnson's legal counsel for most of Johnson's political career, and then afterwards he was brought into government, and Johnson made him the ambassador to Australia. But he was part of it as Johnson's legal counsel through those years of the Kennedy assassination and stuff. So he wanted, $8 million, and he didn't get it because Johnson died.
Fell off the.
Yeah, he resigned in his second term. So, but he still ended up getting $6 million. So we know somebody was that one person at one remove from Johnson was paid $6 million for doing his part.
So we have a guy who was complicit in the assassination of an American president who was given the plum job of being an ambassador to Australia as compensation for his evil doing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how government works.
Well, he only got
$6 million.
He only got 4, and then whenever when Johnson resigned, he went to
Clint
Murchison, yeah,
another millionaire.
The oil barons in Texas who were all involved in the assassination said, "Listen, where's the rest of my money?" And they gave him an extra 2. Mm-hmm. So they were the kind of money men, and they were the motivators behind it. But I mean, it's all tied up with the whole kind of. It's tied up with the FBI and the CIA, and there's all sorts of different threads throughout this kind of conspiracy. It involves the anti-Cuban groups that the CIA had been running, as possibly part of it or being on the scene, so it goes.
The mob.
Yeah, the mob were in there.
SOTT, probably.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah. I think something needs to be said at this point regarding all these different groups and threads. Over the years, it's lost a lot of people. At least they've lost their interest in continuing to research it because there is a lot of plausible evidence any which way you look, and you can't form a cohesive argument for this group, that group, or maybe a combination of those two.
Because it was all of them.
Yeah. The thing is, all of them overlap. The boundaries really blur. I mean, where does the mob end and the CIA begin?
Yeah, it doesn't. The CIA is a mob. The CIA is a mafia.
What is the mob?
It's always been.
Organized crime. Well, Jesus, organized crime. Yeah. That's the state.
And the mob in America is organized crime, in America predominantly, but and the CIA is organized crime around the world.
And there is one common denominator between the mob, the CIA, the FBI, the businessmen, Dallas police, Texas police, the Secret Service, because they all have evidence against them. And a lot of those evidence are valid. Is that they're all part of this elite that was the target, that was threatened by Kennedy, and therefore Kennedy became their target. And they all participated, they all brought what they could bring to the plot to assassinate JFK.
Well, it's like when they assassinated Julius Caesar. They had 60 conspirators, and they all had a knife, and they were all supposed to stab him at least one time. And by the time it was done, there was, 23 wounds?
35.
35
stabs.
wounds. 35 wounds.
One lethal.
so 35 people actually stabbed. So, I mean, we may assume that the whole thing was set up to spread the guilt, to spread the responsibility, to implicate everybody so nobody would rat out anybody else.
Yeah, or they threw in groups over the years. People have disseminated information or put information out there pretending to be conspiracy theorists just to muddy the waters, to put people off on, to make it so confusing that people go, oh my God, it sounds a bit crazy, to try and run it off the tracks when people come out with ever more outlandish explanations or throw in more and more groups, but at some point, if you look at it, you've got pretty much almost every major, actor in the world stage is involved in it, when that's unlikely, but that just muddies the water and makes it a bit less credible for a lot of people. It's like they throw their hands up and say,
well, I've read 2 books. I read one book and watched a video by 2 different individuals, both of whom claimed that they fired the kill shot.
Yeah.
One was a French intelligence person, and the other was this guy that's being promoted as the assassin of JFK, and he's in some prison up in the Netherlands or something, or maybe he's in prison in the U.S., and the guy who's promoting this particular theory is in the Netherlands. But there's two people that I've read that they claim to have been the one who fired the kill shot.
Yeah, I'd be suspicious of that, though, because people who are still alive and who can make that claim, suddenly it's, attention-seeking, essentially. I killed JFK and I'm still alive. I think the people who fired the shots are dead. Now, I'm pretty sure there's some pretty hard evidence that the person who actually fired a shot from the Texas schoolbook depository is dead, because LBJ Johnson had a long history of criminality, of having people bumped off.
And this guy was a U.S. president, a criminal.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. He had been involved in legal scandals for many years before he.
And his daughter had such a lovely wedding in the White House. Yeah. I mean, they acted like normal people.
But he had a hitman, a guy called Malcolm Wallace, who was a professional from Austin, Texas, and he was murdered in 1951, and he was at the time dating Johnson's daughter. So there's a suggestion there.
Johnson's sister,
sorry. So there's a suggestion at the time that for whatever reason Johnson didn't like this guy dating his sister, so he had him killed. This is the kind of caliber of person you're talking about. So,
and that murder was while he was vice president.
Yeah.
And Johnson's sister had a tendency to talk a lot, and she was using substance and revealing information.
So this guy, that LBJ's hitman, Malcolm Wallace, when the police went to the Texas schoolbook depository after the murder and went up and found this supposed sniper's nest, they basically dusted the place for fingerprints and kept everybody who had been there in that floor of the building and took all their prints and disqualified them. So they were left with one print. And that print was on a box right beside the sniper's nest. It was taken from a box right beside where the shooting occurred. And that print was then locked away in the National Archives for 35 years until 1998, when an investigator in the U.S. got it and dug up a matching fingerprint from Malcolm Wallace from the records office in Texas or whatever, and gave it to a fingerprint, a long-term fingerprint.
This was a guy who was an expert in this.
Yeah.
30-some years in the U.S. military. This was his job to match, to check out fingerprints. He got a near perfect match.
Yeah, it was
the highest score you can get.
Yeah, a qualified certified latent print examiner. Well, we were just talking about this guy Malcolm Wallace and the fact that there's a fingerprint taken from the Texas schoolbook depository, the only fingerprint that could not be identified, and it was taken away by the FBI, and it was hidden. It languished in the vault for 35 years until 1998, when someone got access to it and got a copy of LBJ's hitman, Malcolm Wallace, and gave it to a highly qualified certified latent print examiner, along with the other fingerprint from a 1951 murder that Wallace was involved in, and they were an exact match. that's kind of a slam dunk. I mean,
basically, whoever was in the school book depository was definitely not Lee Harvey Oswald.
No.
It was somebody else who was just there to be firing a shot to make it look like somebody was there as an assassin, to draw attention away from the fact that the actual assassins doing the killing were elsewhere, like on the overpass and on the grassy knoll.
Well, no,
because I don't think anybody could have gotten off a shot that would have killed Kennedy from that school book depository.
Maybe. I mean,
it's not mutually exclusive.
It might have been. It was difficult, but it's possible. I mean, the trajectory of the bullet was kind of downward from behind, so it did come from an elevated position behind the motorcade.
Yeah, but there were other bullets that came. I mean, the one
front.
that took the back of his head off came from the front.
No, of course, yeah. But the thing being that
the one that shot him in the throat. You know?
Yeah.
Well, there are a few things here. The important point we were making as we got cut off is that the only evidence of somebody being in that sniper's rifle nest, sniper's nest as they call it, and the 6th floor of the school book depository, was a known hitman with at least 17 murders to his name, of a personal hitman of Lyndon B. Johnson.
Yes.
And Lyndon B. Johnson was basically a criminal who was made president of the United States. People, your president was a freaking criminal.
And the way they connected this place, the shooting nest, to Lee Harvey Oswald was because of the rifle, this Mannlicher Carcano 6.5. But in the beginning of the story, in Evidence of Vision, you see the historic documents. The first reports mention a Mauser 765, and the Mannlicher Carcano is only placed later in official narrative. And the only 6.5 bullet found is not found in the body of JFK. It's found on the, how do you call that, the bed, transportation bed? Yeah, where
they found him on the stretcher in the hospital.
In the stretcher, yeah.
Somebody
exactly.
just walked in there and took it out of
it.
their pocket and dropped it there. Oh, this bullet just fell right out of him.
Yeah, so it's so full of inconsistencies and really obvious. I mean, just talking about the trajectory, someone fired from behind and hit Kennedy in the back, on the upper back, and it went through his body. And this magic bullet thing also is a bit dubious because that might be a bit of a red herring, because people have assumed that Connolly was sitting right in front of JFK at the same height, but Connolly was actually sitting more to the left. He was in a jump seat in front of him, which is a smaller seat, and it was pushed to the left, so it was to the front and left of where Kennedy was, and it was also about 3 inches lower than he was. So based on that configuration, it's possible that there was no need for a magic bullet. That the same bullet that went through Kennedy and through his upper back could have done the damage to Connolly.
Yeah, we should probably explain a little here for any of the young ones like me who are fairly new to this. I couldn't believe when I first heard this. The official story of Lee Harvey Oswald being a lone assassin of the President of the United States rests on this magic bullet. That's their own term. They called it the magic bullet because it managed to create 2 wounds, an entrance and exit wound in Kennedy, and then 2 wounds in Connolly, went through his shoulder and into his wrist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that to my mind immediately that was preposterous.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole case rests on that. It also rests on the story that they just wouldn't change. It was the first story and they stuck with it, so they had to shape everything else around it. Is that there were 3 bullets only, 3 casings, 3 empty cartridges found in the sniper's nest, sitting perfectly, lined up in a row on the window ledge, those 3, and initially they said they found a Mauser. Then they went, oops, it was a different rifle because the Mauser was a .65, the bullets were .75.
Bullets were from a different gun.
No,
yeah, but they found a Mauser in the building. They went and grabbed the Mauser and said, oh, look, I found it. But then it turned out that the bullets didn't match the gun.
Exactly.
But they kind of covered that up. They didn't necessarily afterwards go and say, oh, we found another Italian rifle that matches this. That was all.
No, way they explained it, they said, oh, there was a mistake in the identification of the gun because Mannlicher Carcano used the same mechanism as Mauser. But as Roger Craig points out, the man who identified the Mauser 765 in first place was an expert in weapons. He owned for years a weapon store. So it was it's pretty obvious. It was written actually, and the expert showed the other detectives Mauser.
It was written on the barrel of the gun, Mauser. Yeah. He picked it up and said, one of the Dallas police chiefs was there, grabbed the Mauser from the box, said, "Oh, look, I found the gun, and what does it look like?" And this guy with the Dallas police, who was an expert in firearms, said, "It looks like a Mauser to me." And then the police chief he found said, "Yep, you're right. Look, it's written here, Mauser, right on the barrel." So that was, they can't change it afterwards. It was a Mauser. They found a Mauser. That was the gun. And they found 3 bullets that don't match a Mauser. And the other thing about bullets is that there was a .45 caliber bullet that could not have been fired from either rifle, even if there were 2. Certainly not from a Mauser or the Italian one that the bullets matched. Found on the road to the left of the limousine that hit a manhole or hit the concrete surrounding a manhole, and Secret Service agent was seen by a member of the Dallas policeman who was there, saw a Secret Service agent pick it up and put it in his pocket and walk away. And that guy who saw him do that a few years later died in a shootout. The other thing about this case is that a lot of these people who have information that directly contradicts the official story have all died in rather mysterious circumstances.
Like Roger Craig.
Indeed. Roger Craig himself.
In 1975, he died of a wound in the back, inflicted by a rifle. Although he was owning 2 pistols, the conclusion was suicide.
Yeah, he shot himself in the back.
With a rifle.
That's like that other guy, wasn't him? Gary somebody who committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head?
Gary Webb, yeah.
Gary Webb, yeah.
And the Colt 45 story, there's a bit more about it, because the witness, the lady, she saw this, something like looked like a bit like a mole excavation, under the grass, near the sewage concrete.
Manhole cover.
And a detective came over, and the way he rationalized it, he said, yeah, there's a piece of the skull of the president that flew under the grass, and that made this shape.
Yeah, this clearly...
Meters long shape.
They had clearly the story beforehand that was set was there would be 3 bullets. Hence, they had placed 3 ready to be found, 3 spent cartridges. But this extra... Initially, they said 3 hit the president and Connolly. But they had to reduce that to 2. And this is where the magic bullet came in, because at least one of them missed completely, ricocheted off the street, and hit a bystander further on. He was up at the underpass where the motorcade passed James Tate. And because he was hit, they couldn't say, well, there was something else. So that discounted one of the bullets.
And several witnesses reported 4 shots. And
up to 5 and 6.
Yeah.
So, no matter which angle you're looking at it from, you can come away pretty satisfied there at least was more than one shooter.
Yeah. What pisses me off a lot is that even to today, and there's a lot of news stories these past few weeks, and there'll be more leading up to the 50th anniversary next week, that talk about or refer to conspiracy theories. And they think they're being so open-minded by saying, well, was there a conspiracy? Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, trying to find this kind of middle ground type thing, when it's so goddamn obvious that the official story is complete and utter bullshit. And any person, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a forensic expert to see it, because all you have to do is look at the video footage and you see that Kennedy was clearly shot from the front right. You need to have a basic understanding of mechanics. Like if you've ever got hit in the head by a baseball or something like that, and your head goes in the direction opposite to the direction that the baseball came in, everybody knows that. So when they see there's certain aspects of human mechanics that everybody's familiar with because they have a human body and have experienced that themselves, and they know. So when you see someone's head going back and to the left, that means that something hit them on the front right. And that's what happened to Kennedy, and everybody knows it, yet they persist. And that means if the bullet came from the front right, it didn't come from the Texas School Book Depository, therefore it wasn't Oswald. But the media, to today, are still insisting that, these conspiracy theorists, that's gone on for so long, it's so strange that this kind of thing would still be discussed. Yeah, because you've been lying blatantly and flagrantly in our faces for 50 years, in the face of clearly observable facts. And it's ridiculous. I mean, there's no other explanation when you see the media doing that. Other than the fact that they're deliberately and consciously lying, unless they're complete and utter retards. I mean, I'm talking here about the ordinary person in the street. Supposedly a newscaster or an anchor or a journalist is more intelligent than the average person in the street. But the average person in the street can tell what happened, i.e. the bullet came from the front, therefore it wasn't Oswald. Yet supposedly journalists and stuff can't bring themselves to simply say that.
And you also have Jackie Kennedy. You have those unforgettable pictures of Jackie Kennedy crawling on the back of the limo
to get
in order
pieces
to
of her
pick
husband's
up.
head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's basic physics. The shot, one of the shot, this shot that went to the head of the president was shot from the front, not from the back.
Yeah, and she wanted to get the pieces, put him back together. I mean, that's kind of instinctive.
And
yeah. So, I mean,
heartbreaking.
Hell of a woman.
Just talking about this guy, Malcolm Wallace, who was undoubtedly was up there in the sniper's nest, i.e. not Oswald. LBJ's hitman was up there. He died in a car accident one night in 1971. There are several other people who have had access to information that have also died. Like I was mentioning in mysterious circumstances. One of them is a journalist called Dorothy Kilgallen, and she was the only one who managed to get a private interview with Jack Ruby out of earshot of the police. And she never revealed fully what was said, but she was writing a book. The book was going to be called Murder One, but she said that, and I'm quoting her here, she said, "It appears that Washington knows or suspects something about Lee Harvey Oswald, but it does not want Dallas and the rest of the world to know or suspect." That was in 1964 she wrote that. Lee Harvey Oswald has passed on not only to his shuddery reward, but to the mysterious realm of classified persons whose whole story is known only to a few government agents. Why is Oswald being kept in the shadows, as dim a figure as they can make him, while the defense tries to rescue his alleged killer with the help of information from the FBI? Who was Oswald anyway? So she was writing a book. She said that she had information that she had gleaned from her interview with Jack Ruby, and she said she was about to blow the JFK case sky high. The book, however, was never released because she was found dead in her New York City apartment on November 8, 1965, of an accidental overdose in the early hours of the morning. The cause of death was a potent mix of alcohol and barbiturates, but as so many who died in connection to the assassination, her abrupt passing was suspicious. There are several clues that were pretty flagrant. I won't go on about her in particular, but she's just one of many who have all died in mysterious circumstances because apparently they had information, readily available information, really, but maybe people who were in a position to actually disseminate it widely, had a bit of a reputation, or she was a journalist, so she could have she was going to write a book. But this guy, Malcolm Wallace, he was pretty clearly bumped off because there were strange circumstances around his car crash in the night in 1971. And so that, to me, suggests not only are they bumping off people who would expose what actually went on, the truth about the assassination, but the people involved in it as well. Any of the patsies, in the sense of, obviously, Oswald was a patsy, he was bumped off. Jack Ruby was the same. But also the people who were involved in it, the lower-level shooters and stuff. They thought they would get protection, but, it comes to the point where these guys are a bit of a liability.
They're
We can't be
expendable.
100% sure. Yeah, they're expendable.
And higher level too.
And
The case of the Moran Shield is interesting. The Moran Shield was a CIA asset, nicknamed the Baron, and he was the babysitter in CIA of Oswald. The Moran Shield realized that he had been manipulated too. And a few days before testifying in front of the Select House Committee, he died of a heart attack.
Supposedly.
Actually, on the day, I think he died of a gunshot wound.
Of gunshot wound.
I think he supposedly swallowed a shotgun on the day he was to testify.
A rifle in his mouth, which is a difficult trick to do.
And they investigated, and the ruling was suicide.
Suicide, yeah.
However, we know it's not suicide, or we strongly suspect it is, because he had a special alarm system in his house.
House alarm.
and he was being monitored. And the recordings of his phone conversations, not just phone conversations, there was actual. His house was tapped in a way that any sound emanating could be picked up, and this was leaked at some point. And you can hear the very moment. You can hear a door or a sliding French windows open, and the alarm's going. It's set at medium level, so it just goes beep, 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 and then boom.
Someone came in.
Someone came in and killed him.
I read an article the other day where somebody revealed a letter that de Mohrenschildt wrote to his close friend George Bush Sr.
That's right. They went to school together.
And or a relative of his went to school together. There was some familial association, and he wrote asking George Bush Sr. to call off the dogs from harassing him and surrounding him and so forth. And then I read the copy of the letter that George Bush Sr. wrote back to him, basically the coldest letter I have ever read in my life. It was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think there's anybody, following you or closing in on you or harassing you or, I'm really sorry you've had such a rough time and, problems with your wife, your daughter died, tragic, but, nothing's going on. You're not being followed. You're not being harassed. You're not being tailed. You're not being pressured in any way. And then, boom, he ends up eating a bullet.
This was 1975, and Bush had just become director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
76.
He
was about to become. Yeah, so
if you haven't seen it yet, you must. Evidence of Revision. It's an incredible
archive footage
montage, if you like, with some narration of archival footage. Some of it, is pretty readily available. You might recognize it from other documentaries, from
but it's all
TV
put together and
it's put together. Yeah,
it makes the case, and it's about 10 hours of footage, and you'll never forget watching it because you will see the actual news shows that appeared at the time. You'll see Walter Cronkite announcing that, the gun that they first announced that was being used has now been changed. It's really this kind of gun, and all of these various things that happened as it happened. These video clips are amazing historical footage.
And this documentary, Evidence of Revision, also shows the pattern. JFK, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy, and Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
How those heroes put down one after the other, according to similar modus operandi, and the guilty ones were never identified.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, what people don't understand, and what's really, I think, what makes it so monstrous is that there is no evidence whatsoever to link the Harvey Oswald to the assassination of JFK. There's none. Not only is there no evidence to link him to it in any direct way, there's evidence that other people, as we've just been discussing, that other people were responsible. Yet, look it up on Wikipedia or look it up, wherever, look it up in the media, listen to the media talk about it, and Lee Harvey Oswald did it. And they perpetuated this myth with no evidence whatsoever. No one can produce evidence. So it's not based on evidence. It's based on hearsay at this point. It's based on propaganda with nothing to support it. And at the time, it's kind of interesting because at the time, Walter Cronkite read out a statement from the Russians, a Russian attaché in Washington. I think his name was Valentin Zoran, and Walter Cronkite read out the statement, and that was the official statement from the Russians about the assassination. And I actually have an audio of it here, and I'll just let you listen to it. It's quite short.
Radio commentator Valentin Zorin, one of their respected, as far as the Soviet goes, mouthpieces of the Kremlin, is trying to counter charges on Moscow radio that President Kennedy was a victim of a leftist fanatic. He has said, those who know how the security of President Kennedy is organized know that it is not possible for a fanatic to commit such an assassination. A political crime, thoroughly prepared and planned, has taken place, Valentin Zorin says. And this terribly inflammatory statement by one of the kingpins of Soviet propaganda in Moscow, he went on to say, quote, It is not accidental that it took place in the southern states, which are well known as a stronghold of racist and other fascist scum. It is precisely here that Goldwater, referring, of course, to Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, who is one of the contenders for the presidency, gets his support. We repeat, in case anybody could mistake the import of these words, that this is Soviet propaganda broadcast by Moscow radio commentator Valentin Zorin. Zorin went on to charge that the president's slaying was inspired by forces opposed to President Kennedy's policy of improving relations with the Soviet Union. This is Governor...
So there you have a kingpin of American propaganda highlighting or reporting the truth from the Soviets and calling it Soviet propaganda when the Soviets actually were pretty much on the money at the time. And it was, you didn't need to be... They were a superpower, but really I think most countries in the world, in terms of at the political level, most people there knew what was happening. I mean, anybody who'd kept their finger on the pulse and saw what was going on in America would have automatically seen what the truth was. Yet you had people like Walter Cronkite, a kingpin of propaganda, much loved, unfortunately, disseminating lies and propaganda to the American people and, instilling in them
the conviction that the Soviets were blaming some kind of government conspiracy, for God's sakes,
could never happen,
for the assassination of the president, and they were telling the absolute cold truth.
And at the same time, the perpetrators of the assassination were framing Oswald as the assassin. His motive was this communist cause that they had totally fabricated. At the same time, Russia was trying to cancel or to stop the assassination. There is this case of Nagel, this double agent, KGB CIA agent, who heard about the assassination plan and who managed to, not to cancel it, but to delay it, because apparently the first attempt was scheduled for September 1963 in Washington, D.C. And actually, he managed to get it delayed, and you have Oswald, who was planning to go to Washington, D.C., who canceled his trip because the plan was canceled, the assassination plan, and who finally moved to Dallas for the fatal day, 22nd of November. So the Russians had absolutely no interest in pulling down Kennedy.
And yet they went to extraordinary efforts to sheep-dip Oswald as this leftist. I mean, they had to try and get whatever possible leftist credentials out of Oswald as they could. So, this is where it gets a bit weird. 3 years before Oswald defects from he quits the U.S. Marine Corps. He gets a dishonorable discharge, and he goes to Russia, which in those days was not exactly common
and not easy.
He's allowed in, so he must have had help to get in. He works. He gets married there. He has children. He renounces his U.S. citizenship. I think early 1963, on the summer, just a few months before he returns to the U.S.
and gets in with no problem after defecting.
Get passport and money. But worse than that, he had made public the fact that he had been a radar operator for the U.S. Army, and that he disclosed all the information. Really, but he had a higher than top secret clearance in the U.S. Army, and revealed in particular the U-2 data. And despite this major treason, when he came back to the U.S., he didn't go to jail.
No.
He was given a passport. He was given money. He was listed on the FBI pay list, €200 a month, and he was babysitted by the CIA.
Yeah,
he was a CIA asset.
And it didn't end there.
CIA patsy.
It didn't end there. They had him hand out flyers on behalf of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which is a kind of ostensibly a grassroots anti-war, not anti-pro. I mean, they just basically were against the defamation, the attacks that were coming out against Cuba because they'd have a successful revolution. So he gets himself, attached onto this group. He's publicly, making a show of handing out flyers on behalf of this group in the middle of New Orleans, which from the movie JFK, we see he was doing it in the street corner surrounded by the officers of the CIA,
attention.
the NSA, to be seen. Look at me, I'm a lefty.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, he's a member of the Civil Air Patrol. At the same time, he's hanging out with the Cuban group set up by the CIA for landing further Bay of Pigs type invasions in Cuba.
And supposedly also, don't forget this, according to Judith Mary Baker, he was involved in some kind of cancer project to find some way to inoculate Fidel Castro with a cancer.
Mm-hmm. Although, it wasn't anti-Castro, it was pro-Castro, the fair play for Cuba thing.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, it gets right.
The implication being, here's a guy who's an extreme lefty, and he wanted to kill the president because what? I mean, the other thing, apart from being a so-called womanizer, the thing they hit Kennedy with repeatedly was that he was a communist.
Mm-hmm.
So how does it fly that another communist kills him?
Yeah.
It didn't.
Well, that they don't try and make sense of that kind of stuff, But it seems to me that it was being set up, or one part of the plan was that it was being set up to lay the blame on a anti-American, pro-Soviet defector who
managed to come back to the country, didn't get charged with treason.
Yeah.
They gave him a new passport, even though he had renounced his citizenship, gave him some money, set him up on the payroll, handed him over to George de Mohrenschildt to be his babysitter, basically paved his way to go right down there to the street corner in New Orleans, right in full sight of the CIA, the FBI, whoever, and ply his trade as a defected defector,
mm-hmm.
Pro-Castro.
Mm-hmm. See, what's interesting
Commie
is...
Pinko.
Yeah, what's interesting is if you think about what was going on, if the plan was to essentially sheep dip him in this way and to... I tend to think that his mind was messed with in some way, a la MK Ultra, at some point, that he was, to some extent, mind controlled.
Yeah, like Sirhan.
Yeah, exactly. So he's sent to Russia, or he's told. I mean, he's a dupe. He's gullible. He's naive. He's impressionable, type of thing. So he's told, okay, you're working for the CIA. We need you to go to Russia to act as our spy, but your cover is that you're a defector and you love Russia, you love the Soviet Union, you hate America. So they send him off there, and he gets there, and he tells the story to the Russians, and the Russians say, okay, yeah, sounds interesting, but, we've kind of heard it before, and we're a bit suspicious that you're bullshitting us and that you're a double agent. That's the first thing you're going to think of, right? Then they think, okay, well, maybe we think that, but let's play along with his game because we might get some information from him. We'll keep an eye on him. We won't let him do anything that may damage us or get access to any sensitive information, and we'll just see what happens. And hey, you never know, we may turn him, right? So they start playing this game, and it's a mind game, and a few steps down the line, it gets so complicated that nobody knows what this guy is doing or not doing or whose side he is on or whatever. But the thing that blows that whole thing open, in a sense, or goes way beyond that, is, and I think this is what the Russians didn't understand necessarily at the time when they had Oswald, was that they were thinking that, if anything, Oswald was a spy for the Americans, pretending to be a spy for the Russians. What they didn't conceive of at the time was that Oswald was being sent to Russia to be set up by the Americans to kill the American president.
As a patsy.
Exactly. They would have thought that what are the Americans going to do with their spies in Russia? They're going to try and overthrow the government, stir up some trouble, do something that's going to affect Russia. They probably didn't conceive of the fact that this person was in Russia for a very specific purpose, and it had nothing to do with Russia. Mm-hmm. It had everything to do with killing the American president. What Russian would ever have thought of that? What Soviet, anything, agent, politician, whatever, would have ever conceived of the idea that he was being used to kill an American president, not a Russian politician or president or whatever.
When you read A Secret Order by Al-Baredi, he made an extensive study of Oswald's life, right from his birth. And you see that Oswald's life, every step almost, is surrounded by CIA and all mind control things. The hospitals he went to, the schools he went to, his employers, his jobs, his relatives, his friends. And I suspect that Oswald, unfortunately, is not an isolated case. When you see the amount of resources of the CIA and other agencies, they probably have thousands of people that they groom from birth, basically, for a disposable asset whenever they want.
And what these people don't realize and should realize is if you are among these so-called selected individuals that are being groomed, and you think, they're telling you all of these things, the great things you're going to do, that they're grooming you for, and you're going to help them out. I mean, like they told Oswald. Oswald never, in his wildest imagination, thought that he was going to become the patsy, and that he then was going to be assassinated as part of the plan by
Jack Ruby.
Mm-hmm. And Jack Ruby certainly never thought that the next thing that was going to happen to him was that he was going to be done away with.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's far too convoluted and Machiavellian and pure evil.
And all the shooters that you talked about, the various people who were involved, who then got bumped off because they became liabilities. In these kinds of circles, these people, they all think they're exceptions. Mm-hmm. They all think that, it's not me. I am not going to be done away with after they use me, but that's what they do. They use them and throw them away like Kleenex. And if they would even realize that and just say, we're not going to participate in this sort of thing anymore. We're not going to be tools for this kind of an oligarchy that just uses people and chews them up because, we're just henchmen. We're just gophers. We're just disposable assets. Then the whole thing would come to a screeching halt. I mean, it's like the thing that if soldiers laid down their gun and refused to fight, there would be no more wars. If these soldiers, these assets of these CIA secret plots would just, refuse to participate anymore, or if they would start exposing their spy masters. I mean, I think there should be a website set up where, if you know anybody who's in the CIA, or a rogue cop who's been violent, or used tasers on people, or a government official who's corrupt and has committed crimes, there should be a website, kind of like WikiLeaks or something, where these people can be exposed and listed. People should know their names and addresses, where they live.
And I think for this action to be successful, you need to reach a critical mass, enough people doing this move at the same time, because in JFK's story, you can see several CIA assets. We mentioned Demo and Shield. There is also the Jim and Elsie Cotwheel, ex-CIA agent, who defected, who saw the evil of CIA and started to speak out. But those people, and that's heartbreaking in the JFK story, you see those people who start speaking up. They get neutralized. They get killed because they're so alone, so isolated. But there are exceptions to the rule.
That's why there's so few of them today, because anybody today who has even, that's why there's none today. Anybody who has any plans or thoughts that they might reveal secret information that could do some serious damage or expose the nature of the beast, they probably are smart enough to do a little bit of research if they don't know it already, and they see a 60 or 70 year long tradition of people in their position very quickly meeting with an untimely end. So you can understand why there's really no one today, and I'm leaving out Edward Snowden here.
Well, look at all the people who claim to be so-called whistleblowers. I mean,
what do they say?
There are entire websites that are devoted to all these whistleblowers, and we know perfectly well that whistleblowers that are really blowing the whistle on something really serious that can get any kind of legs, that can get any kind of media coverage, they don't last very long.
No.
Or they don't get out at all.
Well,
because I think they do some kind of profiling. They must do profiling to know who may or may not
absolutely
do that. And, that person, they may even select them to be whistleblowers to attract attention to the wrong things, disinform people.
Edward Snowden, for example.
Julian Assange.
Edward Snowden.
Julian Assange.
Julian Assange, WikiLeaks.
In this train of thought, JFK was like the ultimate whistleblower. This is the way I think of it anyway. If you look at his speeches and what he was saying, from the beginning, boom, he wasn't just saying things that would irritate the powers that be. He was informing people. So he gets up there, his first talk on U.S. foreign policy, particularly related to Latin America. The first thing he says is, I want to apologize on behalf of the American people for all the stuff we've done to you over the past 10 years. This hadn't been broken yet. The American people had no idea of all the subterfuge and people being overthrown, democracy being subverted across Latin America to that point. So JFK, in saying he was doing several things at once by getting up there and apologizing. He was heralding a new foreign policy, apologizing, of course, and he was informing people, and at the same time he was sticking it to the CIA and everyone else. The other things are going to change here.
He was more than a whistleblower, because in addition to these great speeches, he was following those speeches with acts, with groundbreaking decisions.
Let's just listen to one on here.
We need a permanent unemployment insurance program so that there are those who want to work and can't find a job will not be shifted and living on a marginal income without hope for themselves. These are things which other countries in Western Europe did 30 or 40 years ago. Great Britain, and we regard ourselves as a progressive society, had these provisions at the time of the First World War. And yet this is suggested as a most radical proposal. We have to, in the next 8 years, build as many school buildings as we built in our entire history. And yet, we have found it extremely difficult to secure support for this vital program. We cannot leave the 17 million people who have retired and who may become ill. If they have no money, under the legislation now in the books, they have a chance to receive some as indigents. But that is not the way we believe it should be done. And if their son happens to have some money in the bank, they do not qualify. And he goes and pays out, and it may break him at a time when he has responsibilities to his children. Why it is so difficult to secure passage of a minimum wage, paying somebody in interstate commerce $1 or $1.10 or 15 cents, I do not understand. But it is regarded in some circles as highly radical and highly inflationary. For the first time, unemployed men can retire at 62. For the first time. And I do not regard this as a particularly radical proposal. Dependent children can receive aid for the first time in our history without the wage earner deserting his family. In the old days, before this act was passed, if a child was undernourished, it was necessary for the wage earner to desert his wife and family in order that those children should qualify for assistance. But last year that was changed.
The president's willingness to abandon tradition was responsible, in part, for his failure to succeed with the business community, in spite of efforts at conciliation.
I don't remember the figures exactly, but the president was not extremely popular in Texas, nor was he in the country.
I am delighted to have a chance to say a few words about this administration's policy, which has been the subject of a good deal of discussion, acrimony, and controversy on wages and prices and profits. Now, I know there are some people who say that this isn't any business of the President of the United States, and and who believe that the President of the United States should be the honorary chairman of a great fraternal organization and confine himself to ceremonial functions. But that isn't what the Constitution says. And I did not run for President of the United States to fulfill that office in that way. Harry Truman once said there are 14 or 15 million Americans who have the resources to have representatives in Washington to protect their interests. And that the interests of the great mass of the other people, 150 or 60 million, is the responsibility of the President of the United States, and I propose to fulfill it. Then I believe it is the business of the President of the United States to concern himself with the general welfare and the public interest, and if the people feel that it is not, then they should secure the services of a new President of the United States.
Pretty smart right there, you know. My job as president is to work for the people. If you don't want me to work for you, then get someone else. Yeah. What's the answer going to be?
I think if you really want to assess John Kennedy, you know, despite what the defamers and slanderers and libelers write about him, I think you need to listen to his own words and then look at the actions, look at the legislation, look at the plans and programs he put into place. You know, make your own decision based on that. You know, the same as you would make your decision about Julius Caesar, based on his words and his actions, his legislation, and not the slander and defamation. Because the same kinds of programs that John Kennedy tried to implement in the United States of America that led to his assassination are the same kinds of programs that Julius Caesar tried to implement in ancient Rome that led to his assassination.
Exactly. JFK, in his first 300 days, not just him alone, but I imagine most of the creativity and impetus came from him, tried to get over 1,000 new pieces of legislation through Congress. Only a few succeeded because he was up against, you know, such resistance.
He was up against an oligarchy.
But as far as he was concerned, that statement where he says the President of the United States is not the honorary chairman of some fraternal organization, that is another example of him spilling the beans, because he is revealing and informing the people at the same time. He's saying this is what the powers that be expect it to be.
If you listen to his speeches and some of the things he says, and he says it in a very subtle kind of, you know...
Sometimes not so subtle.
Well, not so subtle, but in terms of what he's talking about, his words are loaded, and there is... But he's saying it to the people in a way that is hinting to them what's really going on and what they themselves feel, and he's saying this has to change, and I'm going to change it. And he's not... And he doesn't want to be too inflammatory or... You know, he's not going to expose the evildoers because he realizes that would bring, you know, the hounds of hell after him. But he does it in a way that gets the people on his side. And this is very similar to what, when you're talking about Caesar, what Caesar realized, where he realized his power base lay and who he had to essentially court and appeal to. Forget about all the cronies and the oligarchs and the psychos in power. Focus on the people and get them on your side. And this is what he believed was the way that he would push through change, by saying, listen, you mightn't like it, oligarchs, but there's 160, 60, 70 million Americans who all say yes. What are you going to do? You live in a democracy, right? At least you say so. So you got to go with it, right? This is the pressure he was putting on it, and they did not like that. They did not like that kind of a maneuver being done on them, and that was... and that manifested in their extreme viciousness.
What about
in the way that they killed him?
What about the speech he made about we are surrounded by
a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy?
Monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
He got that in. That was in a context of a discussion on communism.
Yeah.
So
he slipped it in.
It was easy to pass off and be understood by those who are so brainwashed about communism as being, they were nodding going, yeah. But if you listen carefully to what he's really saying.
Well, listen to what else he says. This is a short one. What else he said, and he said this very often about the Soviet Union.
Political development to build the new institutions of peace, that both sides begin anew the quest for peace. Before the dark powers of destruction unleashed by science engulf all humanity. It is therefore our intention to challenge the Soviet Union not to an arms race, but to a peace race. Let us call a truce to terror. The logical place to begin is a treaty assuring the end of nuclear tests of all kinds in every environment under workable control. We also proposed a mutual ban on atmospheric testing without inspection or control in order to save the human race from the poison of radioactive fallout. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames.
One point, but he mentions a nuclear test ban, and it's a good example. A good leader can only make a better world a reality with the support of people. That is only a lie. And for this nuclear test ban, in the beginning, senators' ratio was 1 senator for the ban versus 25 senators against the ban. Mm-hmm. Then Kennedy started a major public campaign informing people, using celebrities, some medias to inform the people, to make them aware. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, even U.S. population was against the ban. But after this communication campaign, there was a major shift in the public opinion. And the elected ones, the senators, followed the public opinion because it was difficult to go against such a popular tide. And in the end, U.S. voted for the nuclear test ban.
But it took, a lot of effort on his part. It took a lot of, lobbying on his part to get the backing to promote the test ban. And that is probably one of the most beneficial things that could have been done, because our planet has been literally poisoned with radioactive fallout. I mean, you could say that all the blame that gets put on smoking for cancer, for lung cancer, is probably due primarily to the radioactive fallout in the atmosphere from the endless nuclear tests that have been going on since
2051. Nuclear test since 1945, 2051.
That's poisoning our planet, and he was trying to stop the poisoning of our planet and trying to stop the terrorism. Mm-hmm. And like you just said, the people in the beginning, because they'd been propagandized, were against the test ban. And then with information and with, media support, common sense, he managed to turn the tide, which then turned the opinion of the Congress people. And by the same token, in our present time, there are all of these people in Congress and in the presidency, and at this point, I don't even know if they care about what the people think, because the people are really against a lot of things that Congress is doing, but they don't seem to care anymore. Mm. They've learned that they don't have to care, that they can do what they damn well please. And unless people start really en masse waking up and acting, together as one to put pressure on their Congress people, I'm saying this, but at the same time, I know that, the Congress people know also that they don't get elected by the people. They get elected by who counts the votes. So they're not even worried about whether their constituents are satisfied with their services or not. Mm-hmm. So something has to be done about that. The problem has compounded itself in the days since Kennedy was elected. So we're basically facing an almost insurmountable difficulty, and it's going to take a whole lot of waking up and acting together in concert. It's going to take demonstrations. It's probably going to take some blood, because people look at the anonymous group and the Occupy movement and how that got shut down and taken over very quickly. These are people that really were seeing what was going on, and it was building and growing, and then they turned it into a violent affray and banned it and broke it up. But that's the kind of thing that they were afraid of. That's the kind of thing they are afraid of, that people will actually do that, and it'll actually grow and it'll get bigger, and then they won't be able to break it up. That's what needs to happen.
One of the main differences between Caesar and JFK, I think, that after Caesar's death, there was this mass anger within the population. But after JFK's death, there was sadness, a lot of sadness, but I didn't see this legitimate anger, as if people had been desensitized from this essential emotion.
Well, what Caesar had, that JFK didn't have. Caesar was a general. He had an army. He had many legions. What did he have, like 11, 12, however many legions, that of faithful soldiers who loved him and had been with him for 10 years or more. And when he was assassinated, all of those soldiers were near Rome, in Rome, around Rome, and they were basically, they followed Augustus, who was Octavian at the time, and,
Well, the big difference between Julius and Caesar, I don't think it was so much that people had been desensitized to anger. It was that with Caesar, a lot of people knew who the culprits were.
That was pretty obvious.
Yeah, but with JFK, people were sold via propaganda and the media, and people like Walter Cronkite sold a lie that it was Oswald, and then Oswald was dispatched less than 48 hours. He was removed from the scene, and people supposedly had to accept that as resolution to their.
Yeah, they were angry at Oswald.
They sacrificed the scapegoat.
Yeah, so they sacrificed. Yeah,
Forget
so
of anger.
But it's, I mean, in other speeches, like the last one we just heard, JFK talks about calling a truce to terror, and he says that on a few different occasions, and he's referring directly to the kind of the Cold War and the threat of nuclear Armageddon, and he calls that terror, rightfully so. It's terrorizing his population. He wants to call an end to it, and it's just interesting that to compare that to what has happened over the past 10 or 15 or 20 years, where his descendants, the people who took power after him, i.e. the presidents and the cabal of the power elite in the U.S., did precisely the opposite. They called for terror. They used terror and introduced terror and terrorism and a war on terrorism to control the population. I mean, what JFK was espousing was in so direct contrast to what has happened since he was assassinated. And like we were discussing earlier, it's not that they took over after he was assassinated. They were already in power, and he was the last opportunity, it seems, looking at history from our vantage point. He was the last opportunity to stop the rot, and turn the tide. And it wasn't possible. And since then, what those people have done is, literally and figuratively, kind of destroy the planet. They've done it literally by poisoning and killing people all over the world through their greed and excess, and they have destroyed people's livelihoods or people's ideas of a decent, humane society where people can live. I mean, just look at the world around you and look at America, for example, and what's happened in America in particular. The kind of society that is there now compared to what JFK was espousing. You have that story just recently. It's one of many, obviously, but policemen shooting at a minivan full of children because the mother didn't want to accept a ticket for speeding. She was speeding 20 miles an hour over the limit, and they pulled her over and wanted to get her out of the car, and she didn't want to get out of the car, so the cop went back to his police car, and she just decided to drive off. So they went in a high-speed chase and then dragged her out, and she took off again, and she had 4 or 5 kids in the car, as young as 6 years old, and the police fired live rounds on the car right behind it. I mean, for a speeding ticket. And
shooting at people for a speeding ticket.
That's what's happening, yeah.
It's freaking unbelievable.
So, I mean, things would have been so much different. I mean, in that one of those speeches we just heard that JFK was talking about, he was referring to European countries. He mentioned England and European countries in terms of social welfare, that they've had it since 1914. What he was planning to do was to essentially give probably free healthcare, free education, unemployment, benefits for sick people and ill people and people who couldn't work, and just create as best he could a humane, decent, egalitarian society and spread it down from the top and enforce it even against people who didn't want to do it because they had been pauperized or twisted or the twisted elements in society. They were going to have to accept a decent, humane society, and America could have been. Imagine what would have happened in those, 50 years to today if that had been allowed to happen. The problem, though, is he would have had 8 years at most.
Well,
and how do you ensure?
He would have had 8 years, and then Robert would have had 8 years.
Yeah. Maybe 16 years would have done a lot.
16 years could have done
it. Yeah, I mean, that would have been hard to overturn if they had 16 years to impose a certain... But unfortunately, like was often said and often referred to in the case of Caesar, in hindsight, for him or Bobby to actually have done that, they would, unfortunately, have had to eliminate, in some way, the people around them that had become entrenched in positions of power. There would have had to have been a culling. How else were you going? Because those people were going to kill. I mean, if he became aware that they were going to kill him, what was he going to do about it?
The way he was playing it was he was firing them.
Yeah, well, that's what got him killed,
and that's morally.
But that wasn't enough. But that's what got him killed. He fired Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA, and he fired
the number two
General Cabal, who was deputy CIA director, and General Cabal was the brother of the mayor of Dallas, who was there the day that JFK was killed. So I mean, there was a conspiracy against him by all these people who were in positions of power.
And he was taking their positions away.
He was taking their positions away because they weren't fulfilling their duties to the people responsibly. And he said, "Okay, you don't have the job anymore." And for that wasn't enough, because they killed him for doing that.
I wonder if, I mean, he's supposed to have said, whatever. If they kill me, they kill me. No, to have had it in the back of his mind that his time was short. But I do wonder if even he. If I'm looking back at it now, it's very risky thing to shoot a guy.
Psychopathy. He couldn't have understood psychopathy.
Maybe not. But I suspect his brother did. He said something about Lyndon Johnson that...
Well, yeah, he figured it out pretty quick when that happened. He realized how completely sick and how completely desperate and how completely evil these people were when they killed his brother way they did.
Here's what Bobby said about LBJ. This was before.
Yes. They were monitoring all this conversation.
Tell the House and Senate not to go ahead with the investigation. Yeah.
There's a photograph that I published in Texas in the Morning, and the White House photographer told you can see that Lyndon lost composure at the time. Bobby hits a post, and he has something in his hand, and Lyndon is real shocked. And the photographer said that Robert Kennedy said to him, "Why did you have my brother killed?"
Our president was a gentleman and a human being. This man is not.
Yeah.
He's mean, bitter, vicious animal in many ways. I think he's got this other side of him in his relationship with human beings, which make it very difficult unless you want to kiss his behind all the time. He's able to eat people up.
But I understand that, he sends all kinds of reports over to you about me and about the Department of Justice.
Not any that I've seen. What are you talking about?
Well, I just understand that he's about me planning and plotting things.
But he hadn't sent me any report on you or on the department anytime.
Well, I had understood that he had sent reports over about me plotting the overthrow of the government by force and violence.
No.
Leading a coup.
No, that's an error. He never has said that or indicated or given any indication of it.
As I say, we'll all get through.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk to you in a day or two.
So that second part was Bobby talking to LBJ about Hoover. Saying that he had heard reports that Hoover was spying on him and accusing him, sending over reports that Bobby was trying to overthrow the government via a violent coup.
That LBJ was?
No, I think he said that sending reports that I was sending it over. But the first part of it was Bobby talking about LBJ. Just saying he's violent, he's bitter, vicious, mean, bitter.
Animal.
He's an animal, really, and he eats people up. I mean, what are you going to do with someone like that? I mean, you can't just fire them.
Well, yeah.
Someone who's in a position of power with that nature and has contacts and can organize things and has the big oil man and people in the industry and in the military and stuff, if you fire them, you're dead.
That's a very tricky question, because if you want to lead a truly populist policy, in favor of the people, and you're surrounded with a psychopath, what do you do? If you leave them in power, you won't be implemented to reach your goal. If you fire them, you make enemies and you die. So how do you deal with
and you can't bump them
environment?
Off the same way they would do you, because then that reduces you to their level.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's like what Caesar did. Caesar had this policy of forgiveness, clemency. Those people who were against him, he forgave them. He gave them jobs. He gave them honors. He gave, and they're the ones that he gave the most to are the ones who killed him.
Yeah, because it wasn't enough. Because they wanted control of the people. They wanted the people poor and in servitude to them. And if a leader comes along and says, "I'm going to raise the people up," well, then you immediately provoke the ire of these people who have been abusing and exploiting the people.
So it comes down to the question, what do you do? What do you do? I mean, look at poor Chavez. I mean, he couldn't, anything he did that blocked the activity of the psychopaths that were trying to destroy his people's revolution, he was blamed for being
a
demagogue, blamed for being totalitarian, anti-democratic, whatever. And there was a whole bunch of slander, because it's like it was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. If he didn't take care of them, they would kill him, which they probably did. Fast-growing cancer. And if he did nothing about them,
the analogy is wolves in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
And the wolves saying, "We're sheep too, and why are you excluding us? Because you're being anti-democratic and a demagogue. You're excluding us from the sheep pen." But you're the one who you see that these are wolves in sheep's clothing, and you see that the people.
So what do you do?
So I mean, you're going to have to appear as excluding them as wolves from the sheep pen. But the ordinary people, a lot of them don't recognize that they're wolves in sheep's clothing.
I think the only answer is for somebody who's in that position to really be a whistleblower, even more than JFK was, to really expose who did what, bring out their dirty laundry. Really let the people know, and then let the people decide what to do. Because, sometimes the wisdom of the people and the activity of the people, is the right answer. Let the people do it. Let the people decide.
And you need the awareness of the people also to stop falling in the traps set by the medias, by all the
right. So you have to educate them.
Voices. You have to educate them, because a leader alone in a polarized world is nothing.
Yeah.
Or ends up like JFK.
I think that would have been an alternative for him to collect information and to just, wait for a certain time and just dump it all and then say, "I've done the best I can do." If you want to preserve your own life type of thing, you don't want to sacrifice your life for it, then the best you could do is not try and fire these people and institute a kind of utopian society. You realize that's not going to work. The best thing you can do is, as Laura was saying, try and expose as much truth about the nature of the system and the world as possible, and then just get out of Dodge.
Just dump it all out there. I mean, do a real Edward Snowden, not a fake Edward Snowden. Really get the scoop out there. Really pour it out there, and take your bodyguards and go to your
island retreat.
Yeah.
He did do something very direct. On the 2nd of October 1963, well, it was indirect, but still, the message was pretty clear for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. There was an op-ed in the New York Times written by a journalist who was very well known at the time, Arthur Kroc, and would have been understood in Washington circles as a close confidant of the administration.
JFK spokesman.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And he wrote an article, and it was titled "The Intra-Administration War in Vietnam." Here's a couple of snippets. So he's speaking, this is basically JFK speaking through Arthur Kroc. "The CIA's growth was likened to a malignancy, which the very high official, which was really JFK, was not sure even the White House could control any longer. If the United States ever experiences an attempt at a coup to overthrow the government, it will come from the CIA and not the Pentagon. The agency represents a tremendous power and total unaccountability to anyone. Representatives of other executive branches have expanded their war against the CIA from the inner government councils to the American people via the press. Exactly what this article was doing. There was a war going on inside the administration, and we're battling for people's minds here. We're hanging on by a thread. That's the most he could.
That's what he was saying.
Yeah.
And the thing is that since those times, the CIA is kind of in second place now, and the NSA is top dog. So they were trying to gain control over the CIA, and they did, and then they gained control over the presidency, everything.
If you look at JFK mandate, by far, I think his first enemy was the CIA. When you see the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bear, the Pig, Vietnam, or Laos, in Congo, all the time, in front of him, hidden, there are CIA agents working to set him up, to put him in a trap, to put him in a bad light, to make his plan fail, to make unfeasible, all along, all the time.
Yeah. In the 1950s, the CIA had Operation Mockingbird, in which thousands apparently, of U.S. journalists, broadcasters, anchors, anyone working in media was either unwittingly or knowingly, an asset of the CIA. And they were basically reading out what the CIA wanted the nation to hear. This was established. This is the system into which JFK arrived. Pathocracy was already congealed in the U.S. at that point.
Yeah, and all the polls today, polls are usually distorted and in favor of the establishment, but all of the polls can't even, because there's such an overwhelming number of people who realize what happened just based on the simple evidence, realize that there was a conspiracy to kill JFK. Polls since then, in the last 50 years, have repeatedly all shown that the vast majority of Americans still think that there was a cover-up and that it wasn't Oswald.
I think it was 87% recently.
Yeah.
That 87% of the American people believe that there was a conspiracy to assassinate John Kennedy, and it did not include Lee Harvey Oswald, that he was only the patsy.
So, in a way, people didn't react at the time against this crime that was committed against them, but they can still react today. It's 50 years ago, but surely with that knowledge, people should at least be, uncomfortable with the state of politics.
Well, the problem
and the ruling elite
is
of the
people
US.
are afraid to do things because they're afraid to be uncomfortable in their personal lives. They're afraid that if they, get involved in political action or in protest action, whatever, that they, and of course the government, makes the threat covertly or overtly that if you do this, look what we have. We have tasers, we have prisons, we can disappear you to Guantanamo Bay, we can torture you. They made the whole torture thing pretty clear because that was designed to terrorize the American people. This is what we can do to you, too.
Yep.
We can, render you to some prison in Morocco or Poland or wherever and torture the heck out of you, and that's what will happen to you if we decide to pick you up. But the thing is that if people acted en masse, really en masse, they would not have enough planes, they would not have enough prisons, they would not have enough torturers. And if people acted en masse, even government employees could walk out of the job. What if the people who work for the power companies decided to shut down all the power to the government office buildings? What if they decided to shut down all the water to the government office buildings? What if the people, the clerical workers, the secretaries, the gophers, the low-level administrators, what if they just walked out of all their jobs? What if they just turned off their computers? What if they just refused to support this system any longer? Then that 1% or fraction of 1% that's in power that is actually doing this, that's actually planning and executing all of this, They would be helpless.
Yeah, and there's a major lie in the statement pronounced by the elite, according to which, if you comply, you will be allowed to continue a comfortable life. Because
it's not true.
As a matter of fact, when you see the evolution or devolution over the last years, the past decades, people comply in general, actually, and the quality of life keeps dropping, and they are going, they're aware or not, they're going straight into the wall. So
they
have nothing to lose.
To make slaves out of you and to terrorize you and to turn your children into slaves and to make you beg for food, and if they really like you and if you're a good enough slave and if you kiss their boots, enough times, they might let you have a little food to eat and maybe a place to live. It's just like the low-level patsies in these conspiracies. They become liabilities. They bump them off. Do you really think that they're going to let you continue to live any kind of a decent life if you're a middle-class person? The middle class has become the poor class. The poor class is not even on the radar anymore. And this has just happened in the last 13 years.
And even being a good slave won't be enough, because one of the main traits of psychopath, that is never enough. The violence, the power, the wealth is always more and more. And how do you get more? By oppressing more.
They enjoy watching people suffer, so they're going to make you suffer whether you're good or not, whether you mind your own business or not, whether you comply with their will or not. They are going to make you suffer because they enjoy it.
I think JFK, he wasn't being rhetorical. We know that in hindsight when he said, either we get our stuff together and we commit to world peace, and I mean that in the most practical sense, we actually start to care for one another, or we're going to perish in the flames. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what's going on around you, fireballs are raining out of the skies, people. JFK probably didn't have any awareness of cyclical catastrophes, but he was touching something so true. If you do not overthrow in some way, at least in terms of not believing the lie anymore, the cosmos will help you.
The cosmos will take you out too.
Yeah, well, people should take his word for it, because he was in a position to see just how psychopathic and evil the system was at the time, and he could see where it was going. Ordinary people don't see it, don't get that insight. So you take his word for it, because he saw it, and he was trying to change it. He realized, and his words were inspired by his view, his vision, or seeing exactly what was going on. So, people don't have access to that kind of information and don't get to know the facts, the smoking gun details and stuff, but, we try to figure it out. But someone in his position knew, and if he said it, that's what was happening, and it's got 10 times, 100 times worse since in the last 50 years. It's just compounded itself, and it's got to the point where,
when JFK was making good progress in stopping the Cold War, Life magazine, I think, had a headline which stated, "If peace happens, what will happen to business?" I think it's a good summary of the state of mind of the psychopathic elites. The life of human beings, of cannon fodder, is nothing, is accessory. What matters is power and wealth. And when you think about it, this business thing, what will happen to business if peace happens? On a national scale, it means less bomb and more schools. It's simple, no loss.
It means social insurance and no drones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
less stress.
Less stress. It means people having food on their tables. It means people getting educated and being able to develop things scientifically and
on the national level and also on an international level, we can see that those wars are just neocolonialism wars to loot the resources of the target country. So it's more inequality, is the destruction of people, is the destruction of resources in foreign countries.
Yeah. So we spend all of our resources
to enrich U.S. elites.
Yeah, the elites, because when
people don't get it.
It used to be when an army went to war, they would go and get a lot of booty, and then they would spread the booty out among the soldiers. The soldiers got something, Now they go to war and they spread the booty out among the 1% of the elites, the military-industrial complex, maybe some generals,
mining companies, oil companies,
Congress people, because they get to be on the boards of the directors of these companies that are building the war machines, they're building the munitions, they're building the planes, they're building the drones, so they get to make tons of money, and all of the money that you pay in taxes that should be going to build schools, to build roads, to build infrastructure, to provide everybody with good, clean, fresh water for free, to provide everybody with electricity for free, to provide everybody with, health insurance, with good health care, with good educations for your children, without your children being burdened with a student loan for the rest of their working life. But all of that money is being spent on killing other people and taking their stuff and giving it to the elite, not to you. They're taking your money.
It's absolutely horrible when you think about it just in basic terms. In an ordinary human society, certain people have certain proclivities, some people are more adept at certain tasks or take an interest in certain jobs, or they're inclined in different ways. In an ordinary society, and in a modern society, if it was based on a humane kind of group society, you would have someone who could be a doctor, and you'd have someone who was a carpenter. And that's a perfectly fair and equitable exchange. For example, that when the carpenter is sick, the person who has specialized or researched medicine would tend to him when the carpenter makes the chairs for the doctor. Right? I mean, what's wrong with that? That's human society. People share their gifts and in a community together. But like in the U.S., for example, there are woodworkers or carpenters who are denied the ability or the access to their fellow human being who knows how to cure them of a disease or to fix up their wound by the elite, by this cabal of psychopaths who say, no, you doctor cannot help that person who is sick
because he has no medical insurance,
because we don't get money for it. It was what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Because if you give him it for free, we won't make money from you doing that. I mean, that's such an abrogation of basic human rights in terms of an individual, a sovereign individual saying, I'm a doctor and I want to help people. I want to be able to help people. I have gifts. But people have been pawnerized and convinced themselves that that's the way it should work, that the doctor shouldn't give his services to someone in fair exchange.
And of course, the person who makes the chairs, he can't really start a business and make any money making chairs because he's going to be taxed into oblivion because he's not working for a big corporation on a pittance that makes him unable to afford good health insurance coverage so that he can get the doctor to care for him. I mean, everything funnels through the corporations
and feeds the elite.
And feeds the elite. Everything.
And workers in the world today, their sweat, their blood, their time, their life is dedicated to get a miserable wage. And this money goes through taxes or purchase of goods from multinational companies in the pocket of the elites that use this money to oppress the very people who gave this money. It's as if you're in jail, you're a slave in jail, and all of your money, instead of using it to free yourself or to live your life, you use it to maintain the cell you're imprisoned in. That's the irony of the current world.
Yeah, and what are taxes? Taxes are a protection racket. You pay us your money or we'll break your legs. That's what it is.
Pretty much.
Because you don't get anything for your taxes. It's basically pay us your money or we'll break your legs, not pay us your money and we'll give you infrastructure, health care, education, food, water, electricity, and a decent lifestyle. It's not that. You're not paying taxes for any of that. It's pay us your money or we'll break your legs.
And now it's pay us your money and we'll pay the bankers their bonus. We promised them because they're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll break your legs.
And we'll break.
Yeah, thinking about Oswald. He was a patsy. He was sold a lie. He didn't know until the end when he actually said, when he was in the Dallas police station, he shouted to reporters, I'm just a patsy. He didn't realize what was coming a few hours later, but he realized he'd been set up, he'd been lied to, and he'd been set up and used as a patsy. And in a way,
Oswald is America.
pretty much we're all patsies. The elite, we've all been lied to and sold a bullshit line about what's going to happen and how we're going to be taken care of and how this is going to happen and this is going to happen. But in the end, we're all ultimately going to be bumped off by the elite in one way or another.
Yeah.
And that's what happened thanks to the assassination of John Kennedy and nobody demanding the truth, nobody demanding a real investigation, nobody rising up against this criminal gang that took over the United States. People, you have been ruled by criminals, the lowest life, filthiest, most disgusting human being types in existence.
Racist scum, as the
animals
Russians
that
said.
will eat you up.
And those animals play the only role they can play. You don't change psychopath. So the only thing we can change is ourselves. Stop believing the lies, seeing the truth, and acting upon the truth. Because they will not change, and until the end of the world, they will oppress us more and more.
And on that note, folks, I think we're going to leave it there for this week. We've just about got to our time limit. So thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. Our chatters were, as usual, chatting and having all sorts of fun. We'll be back next week, another show that, as usual, we haven't figured out what it's going to be yet, but it'll be a good one. So until then, good night.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Have a good one.